Welcome to MSP Voice, the weekly show for MSPs by MSPs. Brought to you by Cloudberry, the #1 cross-platform cloud backup. Learn more at cloudberrylab.com. This is MSP Voice. Hello and welcome to MSP Voice. This is episode number 25. Today I'm very excited to be joined by Doug Miller in my interview with Brightworks Group. Great interview. He's got an interesting story in terms of the customers that he serves, so be sure to listen to that after we go through this little introduction. So first off, again, housekeeping, mspvoice.com is your source for all things MSP Voice. All the episodes and show notes are posted there. You can sign up to be notified of new episodes, so be sure to check out mspvoice.com. We also have a Facebook group, so check that out as well, and hope to see you there. So let's get to it. Just a couple of best of Reddits and a couple of best of internets as well today. So we're going to start off with kind of a fun one. This kind of popped up a little while ago, it was 6 days ago, but it was, what's your most ridiculous client acquisition story? So the poster goes on to say, on a Saturday not long ago, he was annoyed with this pipeline showing, slowing down. So he did a social media post. Second click of the ad, and only about 180 impressions. He got a new contract from a company that eventually signs for just under $20,000 a year. Top it all up, they have an immense appreciation for technology, want to be bleeding edge, and one of our best customers. He says, there are days I still just shake my head about the whole thing. So that was his ridiculous / interesting client acquisition story. And then there's several others, as you may guess. There's like 30 comments on this one, and people telling their interesting story. Here's one that's talking about he was at a medical office building. He had all the clinics except for one. The company they had, they basically screwed up. Their tech told him to go to Best Buy and buy some patch cables. So they basically lost that contract over some patch cables. And now he's got them as a customer. He's done a lot of great things for him, and it's worked out really well. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's quite a few here. But definitely it's an interesting thread to look at, just kind of laugh, some of these interesting stories. And of course, if you have an interesting client acquisition story, feel free to post it here on this thread. Again, the link is in the show notes. Next up is kind of an interesting one. It's fairly fresh as the time I'm recording this. It was only posted about 45 minutes ago. But it's about smaller client offload. So this poster, he runs he's 1.5 person, so, part-time second tech in Southern New Jersey. He acquired a new customer who we were talking, told me that they'd gone with a much larger MSP in the area, but they deemed them too small and passed on the opportunity. So he's saying, is this standard practice for larger MSPs? And then he says, if so, would I be crazy to reach out to some of them and offer them recurring revenue on smaller companies they don't want? So it seems like it would increase their return on their marketing budget while helping to shrink mine. So interesting point. So, are there larger MSPs that don't take on small customers that may be willing to pass that off, maybe for a percentage of the revenues or something like that? Is that an opportunity? So as of now, there's only one comment. So one person said, it's a new trend for established MSPs. Some focus on 50+ user clients and turn down the smaller ones. So it's an interesting thought. So if you are, a small shop, only one, maybe two people, 1.5 as in this case, and some larger MSPs in your area, it doesn't hurt to reach out and say, hey, do you have any small customers that you don't want, or when they call you, would you mind passing them off to me? So interesting opportunity from a business standpoint. You may be able to pick up some new customers. Next up is kind of another employment question, is how do you find your employees? So this poster, they're looking to hire a couple of new employees. They've done Indeed, whether sponsored or not, give them terrible resumes. Craigslist postings are similar. They posted on 3 different college job search engines for local colleges, no response. Where do you post your jobs? So this has a few comments. The one that's got the most upvotes is an unfortunate one because it says steal from other MSPs. Don't necessarily recommend that, but definitely keep your ear to the ground if there's some people unhappy that of at other MSPs. And others are saying the hiring companies have failed to find me a competent employee. This person gets them from Craigslist, or usually from other geeks. So the benefit is you don't end up having to pay a finder's fee. Negative is that all due diligence is on your plate. So yes, Craigslist can be a great place. I found an employee many years ago from Craigslist, turned out to be one of the best employees I ever had, just because he answered a Craigslist ad, didn't have a whole lot of experience, but when I interviewed him, I knew he had the smarts, got him trained up, and he's still doing great at that company. So, again, it's kind of, there's no, like, I guess, best answer in terms of finding employees. But if you're not afraid to do a little bit of legwork, some of the free sites can help. Of course, other ones, another person talks about Randstad and David Alpin Group Recruiters, Monster.com. So, they hire interns and then they convert them into full-time staff. So kind of like a temp agency or something like that, that you can use as well. So, and finally, there is one poster who asked if they've tried the MSP jobs sub. So there is a sub on Reddit called MSP jobs. So, that's the best place to get jobs or employees, is just knowing a guy. So, check that sub out too if you're looking for people, or if you're looking for a job yourself and maybe you want to put it out there and say, hey, I want to work for an MSP, post it in that subreddit, MSP jobs, and see where it goes. Next up, some industry news. In case you were under a rock last week, you probably know that BlackBerry has absorbed Operation Cleaver Beaver Silence into their threat detection unit. So that's the Register headline. There's tons of articles on this, but I always go to the Register because they have the best headlines. Essentially, BlackBerry is paying $1.4 billion to purchase Silence. Looks like the deal's going through. BlackBerry, obviously we all know BlackBerry from the phones, but they're definitely trying to get more into the corporate data center. And having someone like Silence with their security background and profile is probably a good bet for them in those moves. And it's also great news for Silence because $1.4 billion is pretty darn good for a company that's not terribly old. So congrats to Silence, and if you are a Silence customer, would love to hear your feedback or thoughts in terms of this acquisition. And finally, we've got a kind of news of the weird, maybe, but this is backup related. It's not MSP related, but it's backup related. So there's a Maryland man who doesn't have a backup, and he's suing Adobe over Premiere file eating bug. So basically, this guy had all these photos and files and stuff on his hard drive. He upgraded there was a Premiere Pro upgrade that deleted all of his files, and he is suing them for $5 million because of it. Now, if he would have had a backup, he wouldn't need to sue them. So it's kind of one of those news of the weird. And the article goes down on to say he doesn't want your sympathy, but he does want $5 million in a class action suit and trial by jury to blame Adobe for the problem rather than point the finger at not having a reliable backup. So the author of the story was kind of harsh on the guy. The guy is a professional photographer, so he should kind of know these things, especially with the files are his life in these photos. But the author is a little tough on him, as you might guess, because why didn't this guy have a backup, right? Who knows why not? But anyway, it's definitely in terms of you need to have a backup. Now, what I find interesting is if you scroll all the way down and you go to the comments, it's kind of 50-50. I didn't read all of them, but there's quite a few that are kind of on the side of the photographer. It's like, yeah, he should have had a backup, but Adobe should not have deleted his files. Is kind of that thing. And still others point out that when you click on that terms and conditions, where you accept the user agreement, that there's most likely a clause in there that says they are not responsible for your lost or damaged files. And everyone clicks on that so you can get the damn software installed without reading it. And so does that mean that it's this guy's fault because, hey, you clicked the agreement? So who knows where this is going to go, but definitely an interesting story to watch, to see if this guy can get $5 million out of Adobe because he didn't have a backup. So would love to hear your thoughts on this one in particular, because again, it's kind of 50-50, but you should always have a backup no matter what. And this might be a good one to show your customers, although maybe they'll say, hey, we shouldn't have a backup because then we can sue Adobe for $5 million, or we can sue somebody for $5 million. But Who's going to do that? Anyway, interesting story. I now take you to the interview with Doug Miller of Brightworks Group. Hope you enjoy it and have a great week and happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you. Hello and welcome. Today I'm excited to be joined by Doug Miller of Brightworks Group out of the Midwest. Doug, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us where you're at and what you do?
Sure. I'm Doug Miller. I'm the CEO, CTO, and owner of the Brightworks Group. We're a 7-year-old technology success provider. We sort of differentiate ourselves as being slightly different than a standard MSP, serving really a very directed professional services kind of market all through the Midwest. In fact, we have companies that have branches overseas, so we do international work as well.
Cool. Yeah, and you've got offices there in Indianapolis as well as Chicago. Right. So
Indianapolis
not just one location.
Right, and our workforce is largely a mobile one.
Okay.
So we work really almost entirely remotely.
Great. So I was looking at your bio on your website. You've had a career in some IT positions and some startups. You did some work for some hospitals. What kind of made you decide to get into managed services?
Yeah, so I've been on both sides of the fence, both as a provider and a consumer. Mm-hmm. Not just in IT leadership positions. I've been a CIO, an IT director, and an engineer, and then I was a consultant. So I've done both sides of that, but I've also been in non-IT corporate management.
Okay.
Things like a VP of operations, executive VP of operations for an industrial robotics company. And several years ago, after exiting one of the organizations that I ran an infrastructure practice for, I was really looking to get into probably buying a small SaaS company and going that direction. And I was kind of doing some VCIO work at the time to kind of tide things over. And all of the companies that I was doing VCIO work for kept coming to me and saying, our managed service provider is not really doing what we want. And now that we've brought you on as the VCIO, we want you to go fix them. So as I got more and more into that and working with the other providers, it became pretty obvious that there was a niche out there that needed to be filled, that there were organizations like I was working with, which were primarily in private equity, financial services, wealth management, that really needed a much higher touch, more business-centric approach to their IT support. And so I thought, this will be an interesting opportunity. Let's go down this road. I had kind of had a similar experience where providers that I was working with, while they might be pretty good on the technology side at times, were not always the best at really understanding the businesses I was involved in.
Yeah.
And in understanding the needs of the individuals within the business, whether those were the owners or the rest of the staff. And felt, there's kind of a place for a boutique, very directed organization. And that's how we kind of got started.
Okay, great. So doesn't something I know a lot of managed service providers have been in business for a while, kind of started off as break fix and then moved into the managed side. Sounds like you were just kind of managed from the beginning, or at least on the consulting.
Absolutely. We went right in. As I said, I'd kind of been in a lot of other organizations for years and was observing that move into managed services, away from break fix, away from primarily project driven. Most of the organizations I had worked with had done that. They were break fix oriented, they were project oriented. So we determined right out of the box to be truly managed services. Okay. And as we sit today, over 90% of our revenue is monthly or annual recurring revenue.
Okay.
We do very little on just the break fix or project side.
Got it. You also mentioned VCIO, and There was an interesting thread in Reddit last week or this week that basically said, someone had stated, not providing VCIO, you're not an MSP, you're a break fix shop. And it sparked a lot of good discussion within that thread. I was just kind of wondering, because you have the experience with VCIO, do you feel that is something that's required if you call yourself a managed service provider, or is it nice to have?
I think it's really important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you can be an MSP without offering VCIO. I think part of the problem is that the definition of VCI or the definition of MSP has become equated with managed support.
Okay.
Which is not necessarily the case. I mean, you could be an MSP and only offer Datto managed backup, Mimecast, a couple of other products, and you are an MSP, right?
Yeah.
You're not offering a full support. You're not doing managed help desk. You're not doing managed NOC, but you're an MSP, right?
Yeah.
I think you can even offer managed help desk and managed support. There are companies who have an internal IT person that acts as their CIO, that coordinates their external vendors, and the only thing they're really interested in getting from you might be managed NOC and managed support.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily have to have that. Now, I would also say the flip side that's becoming an increasing problem is we're seeing more and more people call themselves VCIOs who are, in fact, nowhere near what a VCIO is.
Yeah, that was one of the comments on that thread was, the definition of VCIO. People, 90% of them aren't even offering what a VCIO should. They just call themselves that. So interesting discussion.
Yeah, they're really, for the most part, I've seen a lot of people that truly are effectively account managers or sales engineers calling themselves VCIOs. And so I think both the term MSP and the term VCIO have become so debased over the last 5 or 6 years that it's starting to become a real problem from a sales perspective, because you go out and you talk about those two things and people think they know what that means because they've had an experience with somebody else.
Yeah.
But it's not at all what you're talking about.
Yeah. So a little bit more, you mentioned your customers that you deal primarily, in certain kind of, verticals, with professional services organizations. Explain a little bit more about that, in the type of companies that you work with.
Sure. And while it's still fairly broad, the majority of our work has tended to be with organizations that employ individuals that typically bill for their time, typically bill a lot for their time, or somehow generate through their hours the primary revenue for the company. Okay, so they're services companies, tend not to be product companies, tend not to be companies that are lower margin. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Our model just doesn't fit those companies.
Yeah.
You have to have a very different business than what we have. So we have worked, we really got our start with private equity, particularly private equity in agriculture, of all things.
Wow.
We have a private equity customer that we've worked with for years and years and years now that owns really a number of really large agricultural concerns, primarily on the organic side of the agricultural industry, and are also involved in joint ventures with some really large agricultural concerns. And yet the company itself is only 19 people.
Okay.
And so you can imagine, their investment fund. Keep trying to move so I don't get this light. Their investment fund's about $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
But there's only 19 of them. So Anybody in that situation, if they're down even an hour,
Yeah.
the cost to the company is very significant.
Mm-hmm.
So we tend to work with those very demanding kinds of customers that are really leveraging technology to keep their headcount smaller
Mm-hmm.
and deliver themselves a very high-touch service. So we end up, like I said, private equity. We've done a lot in wealth management. We sort of danced around banking.
Yeah.
Our background in compliance, because a lot of these organizations also, by their very nature, have a lot of compliance concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Our compliance background tends to make us a pretty good match for banking, but banking is very different than things like private equity and wealth management, for example. So I'm not quite yet convinced that the culture and the industry is a great match for what we do.
Okay.
Specialty medical, with dental practices, clinics, things like that. We do a fair amount of work in design and engineering.
Okay.
As well as construction management. So the common thread always is that there are people that they're not producing a product, they're not performing a commodity action. And they're doing very skilled, individualized labor.
Okay.
So they require a pretty high touch kind of technology support, because almost every one of their individual workstations and phones and application loadout, and it's almost all different per individual.
Okay.
So they really need, they can't call into an anonymous help desk.
Yeah.
That doesn't know anything about the business.
Yeah.
That they need to call in to people who go, oh, that's Ed, and Ed does this at that company, and he's set up this way, and we know that because we've worked on it, we've documented it, we have his configuration, all those kind of things.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times we're talking to MSPs, especially if they're dealing with small business, those types of things. They're looking at, hey, there's a standard image for this 50-person company, right? Everyone has the same stuff. They all have the same applications and those types of things. So, what you're doing is obviously very different because it's on a very individual basis for each person that you're working with.
Right. And again, that's a great model.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a great MSP model. It's just very different than what we do. So, there are customers. If that is how that customer is going to work, it's a fairly good chance that we're not the best match for them, right?
Okay.
And we won't even necessarily go down that road with them.
Great. So, because you're kind of specialty and niche, how do you go about getting business? Are you advertising? Is it word of mouth? Is it?
It's really all referrals and introductions, to be honest with you. We've definitely tried the advertising stuff, and we have a nice website and things like that. But it's never really, that's never really driven it.
Okay.
We really tend to get our customers through introductions, word of mouth, networking, the high touch business. It's high touch sales. It just, again, is very different. Having a inside salesperson that sits and makes 50 or 60 dials a day doesn't work for us, right? We've tried it. I'd love for it to work, but it doesn't.
No, it's everyone everyone has a different product, right? And you have a product, other MSPs have other products, and there's no right way to do it. As long as you're servicing customers and making good margin, then it's all good stuff. So
exactly, there's a lot of opportunity for diversity out there, and I'm always a little skeptical when I read somebody that declares in an article these generalities about the MSP marketplace. That okay, there might even be a majority in certain areas, but the breadth and diversity of what technology represents today is so huge and changing so fast that I don't think you can characterize it as easily or as generally as some writers might like to do that.
Yeah. So, understanding that you are in services and, you have a niche, but you also know the industry fairly well. What kind of advice do you have for someone who might be just wanting to start out in providing IT services, managed services?
I think that there's a couple of things that you got to think about. Number one, you need to really think about, do you actually want to run a managed services company or do you want to be an engineer? I've met a lot of people who have gone down the road. They like technology. They like computers. They like the blinky lights. and they maybe have some problems with authority.
Yeah.
And so they don't really want to work for somebody. They decide to go out on their own. You need to have the business background. You need to understand how to run a business. But you also have to understand how your customers run a business. I've heard people over my career, 30 years now, make declarations about, in terms of IT, all businesses are really basically the same, but in Windows machine, they're not. And so being very clear about that, it's better to be, if you want to be an engineer, it's better to be a good engineer or technician working for a good business owner with his own MSP than it is to be a bad MSP owner.
That makes sense.
Right? You will be very unhappy if you go that road. The other thing I would tell you is that starting an MSP is not an easy thing, particularly if you're going to bootstrap it, which we have. It takes time. It takes time to build a market presence. It takes time to show the market that you really are going to be around for a while. It takes a lot of thinking to understand how you're different than all the other MSPs that are out there, because there are a lot of MSPs. Particularly, we find in the Indianapolis market. Chicago is huge too, but Chicago is different in another way. But Indianapolis has a lot of very small providers.
Yeah.
And it becomes really tough to differentiate yourself. You charge this and this guy charges half of what you do. Why shouldn't I go with him? You're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of thought, and that's why understanding that business piece, it's a lot more than just going out there and going, hey, I'm going to fix computers. There's a lot of people.
You could just do break fix, right? You don't have to do managed services.
And honestly, if you don't want to give it that thought process, if you don't really want to understand the industry and what your business is, you are better off doing break fix, right? Yeah. You'll never grow really large, and you're certainly never going to sell it for any kind of reasonable multiple.
Yeah.
But you know what? If that's what you want to do, if what you want to do is fix computers, don't become an MSP.
Yeah.
The problem with being an MSP is that you're ending up in a marriage with all your clients. It's a long-term relationship. Yeah. Whereas break fix, you're going to go fix their stuff, and then you're going to go away, and you hope that they call you again. And if they do, that's great, but you're dating.
Yeah.
Where an MSP is a marriage. And when it goes south, and there always will be customers where it does, it's a lot more painful because you have an ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
It takes time for that to fall apart, and that process hurts and is painful and is scary on both sides.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to being an MSP than being a break fix shop. And you have to really be prepared for that. I think a lot of people come into the business and don't get that. They don't realize it's very, very different. It can be very rewarding, but day in, day out, I mean, you're going to see things that make you, and there's a reason I'm bald. You know, and we all know that some people are better at technology than others, and some things are just going to make you shake your head, and some customers are going to be very frustrating, and because it's a long-term relationship, that's different. But take the time. I would say the other thing that's really important, and we've done this several times and continue to do it. If you're going to go down the MSP road, and you haven't been an MSP yourself, and you haven't been in MSP management, there are a number of very good coaching organizations out there, and get hooked up with those guys. Spend the money on that. That's worth more than spending money on a lot of advertising or and learn from those people. You can really improve it.
Yeah, and then it's kind of the same could be said about peer groups as well.
Right.
I know that there's a number of peer groups. Some of them specialize in some areas, other areas, but in general, it's it seems to be very popular among the MSP world.
I would agree. Peer groups are very, very powerful. Spend the time networking with other MSPs. Learn from them. Don't come into this thinking I have all the answers. You're probably wrong about most of it. I certainly know I was. I had a lot of assumptions that just weren't right.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think you have to be really, really cautious of is there are all kinds of people out there who recognize the MSP market today as a cash cow. And so they have all kinds of products that they think you absolutely need to sell or you absolutely need to buy from them. And you will learn to say no. In fact, say no to most things because they will take up all your time and they will take up all your cash.
Yeah. Well, you work with private equity, and there seems to be a lot of private equity in the MSP vendor world.
Huge. There's a ton of that going on right now, both in terms of purchasing the companies that we deal with, our RMM companies and things like that. Behind that, but there's also a lot of private equity that's out there snapping up MSP.
Yeah,
a lot of purchasing going on right now. I get hit up once every other month by somebody.
Yeah,
incredible.
So, thanks for all that great advice for someone looking to start out. Just to change topics a little bit and talk a little bit about technology. Thinking about technology today, whether it's consumer or related to business or whatever, what technologies are you most excited about, either today or on the near horizon?
I'm excited primarily in two areas that are pretty tightly integrated, I think. Obviously, number one is on everybody's mind, and it has to do with artificial intelligence. And I see it from the MSP perspective and from our customers' perspective, largely in areas of automation. There are ways to do things today with automation that we've never, ever been able to do.
Yeah.
The machines are so much smarter in what they can do, and intelligently leveraging those things to create processes and workflows and tools that make it easier both for us to do our work and for our customers to do our work is something that I think every MSP ought to be looking at. A lot of MSPs are kind of afraid to look at some of the automation stuff because it makes them feel like they're not going to be as needed, right? Yeah. There are things that they do today manually. That's not the case. It just redefines what you are. And you have to be aware of that. So I'm really excited about that. one of our core values at Brightworks is use smart tools.
Mm-hmm.
We really, really believe in making use of good automation, artificial intelligence, the best tools that we can find rather than the cheapest tools that we can find. Because it means we don't have to expand our staff as quickly, and that we can do more with the capacity that we have. I am also continually excited about what we're seeing on, I'm going to call it mobile, though it's become, sort of less and less called mobile, but the workforce today, again, both our workforce but our customers' workforce, work is less and less a place you go and more a thing you do.
Yeah.
And the technologies that enable that, whether that's software as a service, the hardware devices, mobile telephony and tablets, and just all the stuff out there that enables people to successfully collaborate, communicate, and do their work anywhere, radically is changing what it means to be in business.
Yeah.
That also radically changes what we as MSPs or technology success providers have to do. There may not even really be a network anymore in some brick and mortar location, right? We increasingly have customers that they don't have a file server. They don't even have a domain controller.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean when your customer's entire infrastructure for a 25, 30-person company is, a 48-port switch, an internet router, and a bunch of laptops?
Yeah.
That's a different world than it was a decade ago. But I'm excited about it because it means that we can do things that we weren't able to allow smaller companies to do in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So, but both of those things really excite me, and we spend a lot of time kind of focused on those.
Okay. So the flip side, what are you most worried about?
I think what I'm most worried about, in terms of technology specifically, is that is less than a hey, what they're doing with firewalls, and it's not that.
Yeah.
It's more that the consumerization of technology has led people to think in ways, particularly end users, right? They have an expectation out of technology that's based on iPhones, that's based on Instagram, stuff like that. That what we're starting to find out about a lot of that stuff is that maybe it hasn't really been too good. Yeah. There are privacy problems, there are reliability problems. People have access to that information that really ought not to have that access. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, because people are so used to that, on Facebook 3 or 4 weeks ago, a acquaintance of mine was talking about, there was some meme on Facebook about behind every starving millennial, there is a baby boomer who can't operate Excel. and while that's humorous, and I understand that, the flip side of that, and I said to him, is, look, millennials are absolutely as incompetent about technology as any baby boomer. Yeah. It's just that they're incompetent in different ways. Mm-hmm. That they if it's not Instagram and it's not on their phone, they struggle to use it. Yeah. And yet, because we've told them that they're a digital generation and digital natives, it's very hard to tell them anything a lot of times. Yeah. So you've got boomers that don't want to use the technology because they don't think that they should and that they ought to have a secretary do it. And you've got millennials that think that they don't need to have anybody tell them how to use the technology because they're digital natives, and it all ends up in tickets in our inbox. Right? Yeah. And so I think that, it isn't that there's any specific technology that's coming along and is going to knock us out as MSPs, but I think we've got an ongoing challenge in a much more sophisticated, constantly much more sophisticated threat environment, and a user population that still is not as inclined to take the need for technology education seriously as they really ought to be.
Yeah, and who sometimes tend to overshare information that they shouldn't.
Oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
So
yeah, which is particularly a problem for our customers because so many of them are in organizations that have compliance concerns.
Yeah. Yep. So it's the sharing economy. So.
Right.
All right. So that brings us to our rapid fire round. So
okay.
This is easy. It's meant to be fun. Just 6 questions. Whichever answer you feel is best, just let me know. So first up, Apple or Android?
Android.
Okay. Mac, Linux, or Windows?
Linux.
Okay. Amazon, Azure, or something else?
Something else.
Okay. Local backups or cloud or both?
Both.
Okay. Should you always virtualize? Yes or no?
No.
All right. And then which is worse, printer support or vendor cold calls?
Printer support.
Okay. I think printer support's edging out vendor cold calls just a little bit.
Neither one is real popular here, but printers. Yeah, I'd love to see all printers just go away. I don't know why we print any.
Yeah, I hear you there. Sometimes, it's a necessary evil though.
Yeah.
And I, the other thing, it's annoying, like, when you work for a company, but you work from home and you go to the office and you can't print.
Right.
Because, your computer's not on the domain or, you don't have the right drive. I'm like, it just needs to be easier.
It really should be. And honestly, it's one of the technologies that hasn't kept up with that shift to the mobile that we were talking about earlier. It's still really, really difficult. And we do deal with that all the time.
Yeah.
Maddening.
Yeah. I print from my phone. Great. So as we wrap up, any other information, words of advice you want to pass along before we wrap it up here?
In general, I would just say we continue to evolve in this industry. There's a lot of changes going on. There's a lot of challenges going on these days with other industries like the copier industry that are, every copier place in the world is suddenly turned into an MSP.
Yeah.
And it's going to take more understanding. It takes sharper people. It takes better teams all the time to deliver. As an industry, we need to mature.
Okay.
So spend the time and develop yourself and develop your business, and don't rest on your laurels, because I don't care how big an MSP you are, there's somebody coming to eat your lunch.
Yep. Great. Well, Doug, thank you so much for spending the time with me this afternoon, and I hope to see you around sometime.
Doug, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, and having a chance to talk to you and your listeners. So
yeah,
thanks
very much. Good to talk. It's always good to talk to another Doug.
That's right. You guys stick together.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.